Hello everyone, my name is Felix and I am a publishing manager at AM, and I started as an editor about 10 years ago, and my work is effectively to look after the teams that take the archives under license once our esteemed colleagues in development have done their work, scoping out the collections, working out what we're going to do. So we take that, the archival material from its physical to its digital form and hopefully make a really usable resource for researchers and students so they can navigate the material, find what they need, pathways through it, and so forth. So it was very nice to be asked by my colleagues to speak here, because one of the joys of my job is working with scholars on that process of getting the archive into its digital form. And kind of in the classic way of things, when you're thinking about what, some of the anecdotes from my work, there were kind of three things I thought of, which were, the scholars we work with, they help explain the material, how we're going to use it. They inspire us as well in our work and in the way they talk about it. And they also guide us about the future. And like we have the librarian advisory boards, we also have a future scholarship board as well, which I'll talk to you when I talk about that. But first, I'll just tell you a little bit about each of these things, a little anecdote on each. And so the first thing is really the scholars we work with help explain the material to us. And so each of the projects we do has a set of academics attached to it, and we call them our editorial board. And sometimes they've been involved in the development of the project, and sometimes they come in later and they are there available to us to advise us on things. And so the example I'm going to give you is in 2019 I was working on a project on early modern England, and it was a set of archival material which was supposed to help us look at the social history of this period. And one of the key sources and one of the key archives we got is legal records, because of course, quote unquote, ordinary people didn't leave behind so many legal records. So basically you find out about the lived experience when people turned up in court, basically, and you can find out what they did. So we obviously knew these were really important sources, but if anyone can work out what any of that means, I would have been on the phone to you a few years ago to ask you, basically. And so the idea is we have these people who can tell us how students use it, and these editorial board members are effectively the end users in many ways, and they've used this material so they can explain to us what we can do to help other researchers use it. And so, for example, these are quarter session papers held at Canterbury Cathedral Archive, and as you can see it's pretty difficult to know. We've got these parchment rolls there. We've got other bits of paper with lists of names on it. We've got these little parchment slips. And so for us, it's incredibly difficult. We have lots of humanities graduates working with us, but we're not always subject experts. So to be able to get that, those explanations of what these are amazing. And therefore, and the kind of output we've got is we're then able to tag, because obviously we know that, as I was saying, it's the depositions, the examinations of these records which are really important for researchers. So we can then, once the editorial board have told us, and we can give them some samples and then go, okay, this is this, we can then start tagging the material, and you can kind of see the kind of outputs we're able to produce. What are the recognizances, the indictments, and therefore scholars can then focus their work and discover things more easily. So that's one incredibly useful function of our editorial boards, about explaining things to us. The next thing I want to talk about is how they inspire us as well. And what I had in mind with this was, I think it was in 2017 or so, I was told I was going to be working on the archive of the advertising agency, J. Walter Thompson. And I felt incredibly underwhelmed, and I will tell you why. And it's because I naively, each project I get to work on, I always think, oh, well, what's the big idea in this? And why is it exciting? Why is it important? And it just, advertising just didn't seem particularly interesting. And this is because my first project I'd worked on here was a collection of documents on American history, an amazing archive in New York. And the big idea for me there as well is the genesis of one of the world's big superpowers. And it's full of spectacular items. This is George Washington saying how he didn't want to be president. This is the first draft printing of the Constitution, where they've scribbled bits out, and you can see where they kind of inserted slavery back into the Constitution, or it's the possibility for it. And after that, I got to work on a project on frontiers in human history, and this, of course, is amazingly weighty. When what happens when millions of people go from the British Isles to North America, Africa, Australasia, and obviously the dynamics that occur there. So it feels incredibly relevant. And again, you can imagine advertising versus these doesn't seem particularly interesting. After that, I got to work on an incredible collection of films housed at the BFI. And these are communist documentaries made in the communist world. And again, the big idea is the big ideological fissure of the 20th century. And it's like, and again, advertising, it's like, gosh. But what I normally like to do is when we start a new project, is call up the editorial board and ask them, well, what's the point in us doing this? And so I remember the conversation I had with a guy called David Blunkey at Texas A&M University, and I said, what's the point? And he started talking about J. Walter Thompson as a company, and he says, you have political history, which is obviously about events, and I'm like, yes, I know that. And he says, and then you have social history, which is obviously the lived experience of people, and yes, and I know that. And then he said, and this material is in the realm of cultural history, which is the meaning of life. And I was like, okay, and I kind of set up at that point. And sure enough, this project became the most interesting and thought-provoking project I've ever worked on here. And if I had to go back in time, I'd do this one again, because it really changed the way I thought about the world really through this. And that's beyond, is it manipulation, or it's an incredibly interesting topic, or leads you to a lot of different places. So again, these editorial board members can really inspire us to think about why it's important, the work we do. So incredibly valuable. Another guy. After that, I got to work on the archive of Shakespeare's Globe Theatre. And again, I asked the question, why study Shakespeare? And the guy at the Globe Education, paused for a moment. He said, why breathe? So, they're very good at, getting us interested in things. And finally, I just want to talk about as well how scholars can help guide us in the future. And you've heard about the library advisory boards. We also have what we call our Future Scholarship Board, which are groups of academics and archivists who can help us think through the future of the scholarly landscape. And right now, there are about 18 of them, and there's two kind of things we consult them on. One is how we work with community archives and the potential processes there and difficulties. And the other, which I'll talk to you a little about here, is about digital humanities as this, very much emerging and fast-moving landscape. And so in terms of digital humanities, it's an area we really want to support and facilitate research in this area. And as you can imagine, our projects generate vast amounts of underlying data. I'll talk to you a little bit about, this one is Colonial Office records from the National Archives, or about the Caribbean. And you can see that's a bit of manuscript, and you can see we can generate huge amounts of underlying data, and that could be the OCR, the optical character recognition, or in this case, the handwritten text recognition. And if you think there are hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pages of this, and we're quite anxious about how we can support scholars to access this data, but there's also a lot of challenges for us in doing this, because to deliver all of that material through our front end is incredibly difficult. And so what we found incredibly useful talking to these people is kind of the reassurance that there are ways of accessing this, but it has to be through requests and so forth. And what's been really incredibly useful with this board is how they've told us actually you do not need to deliver everything. And actually scholars don't necessarily want everything. What they want is samples of material, and then they can go and request a lot. And this of course makes our life a lot easier. And this is what we're able to do, is to create a little page saying here are some sample sets of data, download them, have a look, do whatever work you want to do with them, and then if you want the rest, you can come back to us for more. So yes, those are the things that occurred to me with the theme of collaboration on working with scholars. So thank you very much.
Thank you for that, for each of you. I think some really interesting points there, based on collaboration, depending on whether you're coming from an archive perspective, a publisher, or from a librarian. We've got a few minutes for questions, if we have any from the room for any of our speakers.
This is for Dominic, maybe a slightly dangerous question, but as someone who's signed off on many library advisory boards and read the reports and see the feedback we get, and we take it very seriously and listen, is there anything else we could do to improve them? And I guess one of the things that I'm always keen to see is kind of dissenting voices or challenging voices that are going to push back in the best way to help challenge us and get our products ever better and our content ever better. So any thoughts on that would be welcome.
I think with the AM board, I've certainly given feedback on products which I don't think will sell in terms of that or add value to our institution. I think the main thing is just to encourage attendees or members, for example, to be open and transparent and encourage that dialogue. And I'm not just saying that because I'm at the AM day, I'm not at the Clarivate or the EBSCO day, but I do actually feel that when we have these at AM, those views are listened to, obviously, so I think this around just encouraging that open, transparent debate from the outset. And I do feel that, I honestly, genuinely think that.
Thank you. I was interested, Victoria, actually, to pose a question to you. Obviously, working with us on Women's Life, Writing's Voices, that was very much a project all the pandemic, and you described the process of obviously undertaking some of that research for us, which is not historically something that we've done. I think from our perspective, we saw some real advantages in that, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that. Is that a way that you would actually like to work again? Did you derive some benefits from that in terms of your own work as well as what you provided for the project?
I think so, yeah. Personally, the research side of things is something I'm quite involved in, so it's actually really interesting hearing Felix talk as well about sort of his involvement in that side of things. But yeah, I think for us, I think part of it, it depends, obviously, like different people have different capacity. At the time, we had the capacity to do that. At the moment, we wouldn't. I think it kind of perhaps gives the archives like a bit more of the sense of control over what they're doing as well, because obviously for some people, like someone mentioned copyright and things, it can feel like quite a big thing to sort of think, okay, I'm handing over like quite a big chunk of our material to someone else. And so it just allows us to have that, I guess, a bit more confidence in what's going to be used, how it's going to be used, and have like maybe a bit more of an. Obviously, we've not worked with you previously, so we don't know what the process would have been like otherwise. But sort of having that maybe feels like a more open conversation with having that involvement in it.
You spoke about the kind of the story being more focused on the community and sort of collaborations. What's been the kind of the feedback from the local community on that? Has it been kind of excitement, enthusiasm, or has it been a lot of sort of outreach on your part to sort of get people to understand what it is and how we can work with them?
At the moment, I think it's more the latter, where we're kind of still in the. It's been a little bit difficult because the move has been the actual physical move's been delayed, so by now we should have actually been open. And so like, there would have been a lot more work already going ahead on the project front with working with communities and things. So that has been quite difficult with not actually having access to the collections for those groups. But having the National Lottery Heritage Fund stuff it's actually been really nice for us as for me as an archivist to sort of be able to have some of these conversations with the exhibitions people and the volunteers and the community engagement and say, these are all really good ideas that we'd be really interested in doing. And previously, we would have also then been the ones trying to do that at the same time as the rest of our jobs. So having people dedicated to that particular work is going to be, you know, it takes the pressure off us. We can like feed in the ideas. We don't actually have to carry them out ourselves. And hopefully, like I said, having that capacity will also then broaden out what we're going to be able to do in the future.
You worked on one of our projects, you filled out one of our archive spreadsheets, but you work in the archive as well. Is there anything that we don't do at the moment when we do our development work that you would recommend that we do or think about?
I don't know, because I wasn't involved in the project like, quite from the early days. I came on when, you know, you were needing someone to actually come and do the research aspect of it. Although my manager had already asked me like to be involved a little bit. Like she'd kind of put generally to everyone on staff, like this is something that we're talking about. What sort of content do you think we have, and getting people to put in suggestions. I think maybe just kind of like more of a broader. I think one of the things with archives as well is that, you know, we have quite a lot of material that is not catalogued. So whilst we know about it, there's not that information available on the front end for you guys as like looking at stuff as like initially a particularly good archive that might have the content we want. So maybe kind of just putting out broader feelers to people to see what other sort of stuff they might have, that there's kind of like waiting. So it might also be an opportunity then for that archive to prioritise that collection. You know, the digitisation process can help with getting the cataloguing done, because that's one area where, you know, funding is usually pretty low for archives. It's in the actual cataloguing, but it's hard to do all the projects that we've got if we don't have the material catalogued. So you kind of end up in a bit of a catch-22 sometimes.
I have a question for Felix. I'm on the editorial board for the Shakespeare's Globe, and I've just heard that it's going to have a second phase. I guess I'm talking about what AM could do. I have no idea what the usage was for it, or what has caused you to decide to have a second phase of the project. So I guess, yeah, a little bit of feedback would have been really interesting. I mean, obviously, I guess we'll hear as the project goes forward, but I'd be interested to hear what the process is.
So yes, in terms, the usage I couldn't tell you and the outcomes I couldn't tell you off the top of my head, but I can tell you some of my colleagues here might be able to tell you a bit more, because it's not something I've been involved with. But obviously, because the Globe is a working theatre, it's producing more material all the time. So there's just an opportunity to go beyond our date cut-off, basically, for the projects you worked on. So, and that's effectively it. And then just to, you know, expand the, expand the number of productions people can look at, the comparisons, the historic comparisons. So it's just an opportunity to really extend that reach, really, and yeah.
If there are no more questions, I've got a final one for Dominic on library advisory boards. I'm just curious to hear, you said about having kind of peers from different institutions across the UK. Have you ever been surprised by any discussion that's come up in one of these sessions, or is it quite comforting to know that kind of your challenges or opportunities are quite similar across the board?
What, in terms of institutions or between ourselves and publishers?
I think in terms of institutions.
Yeah, I think it's uncanny. I mean, there's sometimes some local circumstances, but for the most part, I'd say that, you know, and hopefully my colleagues from the UK universities back this up, we are facing the same challenges and opportunities, basically. I think it's how we grasp those opportunities is possibly different, but otherwise I think the challenges are the same, but the opportunities are there as well.
Excellent. Thank you so much, each of you, for the fantastic sessions.